Hello, I am Joey Dobos, and this is the Decolonization of Africa. Today we will learn about France and Britain's hold over their colonies and the independence from those settlers. In 1945, nationalists from Algeria revolted against the French colonists when French colonial police fired into a peaceful demonstration supporting Arab and Algerian nationalists. In the aftermath of the riots, some 18,000 Algerian Muslims lost their lives, but only 100 or so French officials died. Throughout 1954, mainly French people resisted the decolonization in Algeria. The Algerian economy was beneficial to the French economy because the Algerians had natural resources that the French could exploit. A group called the Front de Libération Nationale was an Algerian nationalist group and used the mountainous terrain to their advantage and utilized guerrilla warfare against the French. In 1955, the FLN moved to more urban areas, and the French soon realized that this was a problem. After a year of relentless begging, the French did not grant independence to Algeria, but to Morocco and Tunisia. Feeling betrayed, Algeria rioted and the war soon became ugly. Hundreds of thousands of Algerians died, but only a few thousand French soldiers perished. Finally, by the end of the war in 1962, the French government finally agreed to grant Algeria its independence. The war for Algerian independence fostered an ideological legacy. An Algerian revolutionary, Frantz Fanon, encouraged the use of violence to overcome the racism from the French to the Algerian.
Frantz Fanon was a psychiatrist and studied medicine. He encouraged his followers to use violence against their oppressors. He wrote books with his influence on his readers, like his most famous book, The Wretched of the Earth, in 1961.
Unfortunately, Fanon died before the revolution was complete, but his legacy and ideas continued to encourage millions of Algerians still fighting in the war. During World War II, nationalism continued to grow, and many people adopted the movement of negritude, or blackness.
Negritude was the ideology and revival of old African traditions. It was a way to fight the settlers and to instill a sense of national unity and pride. Not only were these African traditions renewed, but there was also an introduction of these ideas into the literature and culture of these people.
A revival of former traditions intrigued many people. With the old inspiration came new types of literature, like Bernard Dadia, a famous African poet who wrote about negritude and encouragement to all Africans struggling. New to Africans was an elite that was able to place a sort of government that was able to hold demonstrations and protests. In addition to these skirmishes were widespread worker strikes against low wages and oppressive labor practices. After World War II, the African ideas of nationalism had to be put on hold. Imperial powers often assumed Black Americans were unable and incapable to self-govern, thus they were more hesitant to decolonize. Imperial powers soon began to justify their oppressive actions as means of preventing communism in African countries. Many countries' revolutions came as either violent or peaceful, but the aftermath of newfound freedom soon led to civil wars, economic instability, or other social problems, like ethnic division. Unlike Algeria's independence from France was Ghana's independence from Britain. Ghana's people were able to organize effective strategies under the leadership of Kwame Nkrumah. Nkrumah organized nationalism, and as the leader of the first successful country to break free from colonial rule, he became a very persuasive spokesperson for other African political issues. It wasn't long until the Queen of Britain, Elizabeth II, came to visit Nkrumah and negotiate. As the two met, ex-colonial rulers dressed in royal regalia were met with new African leaders dressed in traditional African fabrics. After that meeting, Ghana was independent after a peaceful revolution. Another country Britain had colonized and fought for their freedom was Kenya. The situation in Kenya was tense and violent, unlike the easy transition of Ghana. White settlers and Kenyan nationalists, especially the Kikuyu, battled often. Members of the radical Kikuyu campaigned against all them, settlers and even their own people. While many countries fought for mostly independence, Kenya fought mostly for land. The European settlers claimed they had the right to the most fertile land, and they could move the Kenyans to tribal reserves. The condition in these reserves were appalling. They were overcrowded, the land was not very fertile, and the people reduced to the status of wage slaves. Resistance started in the 1940s and lasted until Kenyan independence in 1963. During these long years, the Kikuyu had started the tactic of guerrilla warfare, and the British called a state of emergency to try to fight back. The British suppressed all nationalist groups and jailed all nationalist leaders, including Jomo Kenyatta.
Kenyatta was the first president and founder of Kenya, and used a democratic tactic to rise to power. After years of brutal war with the British, the Kenyatta was able to negotiate peace between the two countries, and even managed to convince the British to grant the Kenyattas their independence. Here are some videos on how Britain used to take care of the Kenyan revolts. We will not stop. We are Kenya. We got this. What is that? Oh no!
The British poured much of their military into stopping the rebels against colonial rule, effectively ending virtually all resistance. While 12,000 Africans lost their lives, only 100 Europeans died. Soon after, however, Kikuyu fighters gained strength to stand up to the British. The British resisted the radical white supremacism and heeded Kenyan calls for independence. In 1959, the British lifted the state of emergency, and by December of 1963, Kenya had negotiated its liberation.